Hey, Your Honor. My name is James Broomstyle. I'm a fire captain with Fayetteville Fire Department. Today, I want to discuss the fire at 114 Main Street that occurred around 1:17 p.m. I want to discuss the motion to throw out the evidence, and I want to reassure you why we should keep that evidence and why we acted in a legally manner. The initial on-scene company officer had to leave due to a possible fire down the road with a life hazard. Due to the extreme circumstances when having a life hazard, he went ahead and left to respond to that emergency. I was only a few minutes out from this fire to begin my fire investigation. There wasn't a big lag of time in there to consider this two different incidents. It was the same incidents that I was carrying over the fire investigation that he began. Before I got there, he gave me a pretty good size up of what they found, and they have already pinpointed the possible area of origin in the living room behind the TV. On my arrival, I had exigent circumstances that entered the structure. I wanted to reassure that I wanted to reassure that there was no smoldering fire that could possibly cause a rekindle hours later on down the road. I also wanted to preserve evidence. To pull up a couple of cases to make my point valid, I want to first begin with the Christy R. Garrison versus Texas. In this case, we found out that an object that comes into view during searching areas where the causes of fire are likely to be found may be preserved without a warrant. All of this falls under the Fourth Amendment to not to void the occupants' rights within their personal space. When I entered the structure that day, I entered it, like I said before, intentions to make sure there was no smoldering fire that may cause a rekindle. When I stepped into the house, in my view, was obvious arson and burn patterns behind the TV. In the electrical outlet behind the TV, there was a melted device that I also seen deemable for evidence. To my conclusion, due to the amount of water usage to extinguish the fire, I believe at the time the burn patterns couldn't be seen, or the accelerant that was used couldn't be seen on the walls until the room started to dry up naturally. Once it started to dry up, all of this became obvious. Another case I would like to use to prove that I use exigent circumstances is Michigan versus Clifford. In this case, there was a gas can that was part of evidence that was brought outside from the basement and was placed outside by the company officer. Some of the evidence found that the fire started in the basement, and any evidence that started in this area was deemed to be admitted as evidence and agreed upon because it was in the original origin of fire area that the original company officer stated. All other evidence throughout the house was dismissed. When this evidence was brought outside, put outside, it was still in plain view sight, just like inside the house. I want to reiterate on the day that I entered the house to make sure there was no smoldering fire, that in plain view was the burn patterns of arson that I concluded to be arson, that an accelerant was used on the back wall, the backdrop behind the TV. Finally, I want to talk about the case State of Idaho versus Christian Reed. In this case, the conclusion was another exigency, and also in this case, is that a threat of a fire rather than an actual fire can also warrant the justification to enter a residence without a warrant. Pretty much I can make an administration entrance without getting a warrant. I want to reflect again that the possible rekindle of a fire due to a smoldering component, smoldering object on this wall, smoldering insulation could have caused extreme property loss and danger to the occupants in the adjacent structures. let's say 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 hours down the road. Now we're into the night, we're into the morning of the next day. The smoldering material in the wall, whatever it may be, gets to that point and reaches that temperature where it starts to combust, and now we got a flame. Now we got a rekindle, and now the property and the lives of other people within the area adjacent to this house are now in danger. So it was prominent that I entered this house to reassure that all materials were properly extinguished and put out to prevent any further damage to property to any owners on the adjacent structures due to the proximity. Both of these houses on the D side of the structure was within 35 feet, and on the B side of the structure we had a fence within 30 feet and another house within 38 feet. These are exposures. So I had the due diligence to enter this structure on an administrative authority to reassure that the fire was extinguished property and to preserve evidence. As I said before, as I entered the residence, that's when it was noticed with the burn patterns on the back wall. That's why this evidence does not need to be thrown out. We need to continue using this evidence to prove the arson case. There was not a big delay in time to signify that another investigation took place. It was only a few minutes of my arrival time after the initial company officer left to respond to the other emergency, which was a working fire with life hazards. To also prove my point of how severe a smoldering fire can be, I got a graph here I would like to show everybody. If everyone can bring their attention to this graph reflects the temperature and the time of a smoldering scenario with transition to what flaming occurs. In this case, we're using a piece of cotton in between a block concrete wall. If you look at the vertical center line, it shows the extreme temperature once flaming occurs. In this scenario, it was 118 minutes when flaming started to occur from the smoldering object. And this graph proves that if a allotted amount of time, if a smoldering object receives enough oxygen and other things it needs to complete combustion, we can have a flame reoccur. In this case, Red Cross was already called out to the facility. With Red Cross being called out to the facility, we know that the homeowners ain't going to be at home. They're going to be staying somewhere else. And if this fire would rekindle, it would cause imminent life and danger to the adjacent structures. So on this note, I had exigent circumstances to enter the structure to reassure that there was no possible chance of a rekindle. At this time, that's all I got to conclude on this to prove that the evidence does not need to be thrown out. Thank you for your time.